Good evening. The news gang is here. All members duly present in studio tonight. The big argument about the handshake. Who called whom? And who cares anyway? Why corruption is no big deal after all. We get down to the Deputy President interview this week. Plus all the many fathers of success in Ugenya and Embakasi by elections. Also on the show tonight, the strongmen of Africa are falling like dominoes. Who next? Who should be worried? But let's begin right here at home with this thing called corruption. And we'll begin with a soundbite from that interview that the Deputy President gave to Hussein Mohammed earlier this week.
And let anybody say, my money got lost and I found it in William Ruto's hands or in William Ruto's bank account. Let us not bring trivial, issues, into this and a lot of money in sacks. How do we discuss money in sacks? Which sacks?
All right, that was the point at which Hussein was asking about the source of his wealth, which business, and that sort of thing. And he said, well, if anyone thinks I have their money, let them bring, which brought the whole thing of just how much should we know about the wealth of the people who are in power. Francis, you followed that conversation very closely, and that wasn't a particularly comfortable part of the interview.
Obviously it wasn't. It wouldn't be. Why? Because the public expects integrity from its leaders. The public expects that the leadership will account transparently for whatever the leaders own. One. Number two, when the Deputy President is asked his source of wealth, it's an uncomfortable question. Why? Because every so often, every weekend, he's somewhere in Harambee donating some money. And when you do some quick calculations, you will see that probably some maths may not add unless he clearly comes out and says, this is my source of wealth, this is what I do to make my money. He wouldn't obviously give that figure. That question will keep coming up again and again and again in very many interviews to us and to other stations, but I doubt he will ever tell any interviewer that I am worth this much. Because the moment he does that, people will now start working backwards. So how comes if he is worth this, he has contributed this? So maybe that's a question that he will continue evading for as long as he can.
But these people usually have this thing that is called wealth declaration, and they put it in some envelope and all that. Where does that go, and do we have access to those things like that?
That is a problem, because that document, they declare what they own before every election cycle, isn't it? But as members of the public, you have a problem accessing that document. You can only access that document when there's an investigation that is being carried out. You remember during the corruption conference at the Bomas of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta was suggesting something, that we amend the law so that these wealth declaration forms can be accessible without a lot of hula baloo, because you still have to go to a court to obtain the details and so on and so forth. Make it very possible for investigators, whenever they suspect that Yvonne Okwara is a public officer, when she was getting into office, she was worth this. And all of a sudden, some buildings are rising, she's all of a sudden driving some vehicles, and you have a question, let's see what she owns. The problem with that document...
Can we say person X?
That's just an example, I imagine.
No. When you talk about corruption and you mention any name, this will be used against me. Trust me.
All right, if anyone, if anyone thinks Yvonne has their money, please say.
Surely.
So anyway,
nice one, Joe.
Okay, but just how much, ladies and gentlemen, should we know about our leaders in terms of what they own? Isn't there a line somewhere where you say, Yvonne, that this is mine, it's not anyone's business? Maybe you can know about ABCD.
Not when you're a public official. And by the way, the wealth declaration forms are supposed to be done every year.
Yeah.
And they're actually, if I'm not mistaken, deposited with Parliament.
Yes.
Which then makes them documents that are then accessible, supposed to be accessible to members of the public, which means any of us can, which is never the case. So this would be an ideal situation. And we do know that there's the Access to Information Act that now, enables anyone to petition for whatever information we have. But I still hesitate to add that that is something that has not happened, considering Mark Masai, our fellow journalist, who asked for those documents. I know we say this during every show regarding the SGR. And they are yet to hear from the government. So this is how ideally it's supposed to be. So every year we would then be able to determine how much more your wealth has increased. But it's really what's the word I'm looking for? It's a routine. So they just file them in and put them in there. And
this just kind of reminds me of the days of official state secrets.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yes. But Joe, starting with the context of the issue at hand, I think our colleague Hussein Mohammed did a very fantastic interview and a very difficult one at the same time, especially around the issue of corruption. It wasn't a very easy one to navigate the tough questions he's had to ask, and he did it extremely well. We do not know whether we got all the right answers, but we got some answers. Now, on this particular issue of cash, we must always remember that in Kenyan politics, cash is a status symbol. Cash, words of money, it has to be in bundles. I remember in the 90s, when there was a big fundraiser at Uhuru Park. Fundraisers were usually held by President Moi to help certain causes, and I think at that time it was about either hunger. I'll rejig my memory on that. But one Harun Mau turned up with 2 million in cash.
Back
that was
day.
Back then.
Yeah.
2 million in cash. What did the crowd do? They cheered. There's a lot of adoration that comes from the fact that you're carrying money. Our colleague Hussein Mohammed was executing a question here on the wealth of Deputy President William Ruto, and Gashuri has explained it quite well, especially around the issue of fundraisers and how much cash he carries to those events. Remember, we covered live the goat auction in Kajiado, and he turns up with a rucksack. You remember two guys standing with a rucksack and said, 5 million shillings from me and 5 million shillings from my boss, President Uhuru Kenyatta. This is cash. What did they get? Adulation, admiration from the public. Now, carrying cash in public is a very big political tool, and it works very efficiently and effectively in Kenyan politics. And one thing that the Deputy President is doing very well is using cash as a political tool. Not just as himself, but you can see even the team around him. You see MPs who a few years ago, the most unlikely donors of that kind of amount of money, suddenly giving so big donations to a church and all this.
Actually,
so the tool is at work.
You remember during the Kanu times where the president would go somewhere, and then during the news, which of course always started with him, they had to mention every single person who was there and how much they contributed. And I've said, I think, on the show
and William
before,
Ruto is a very good student
of that.
But wasn't he in YK92? And what was YK92 famous for? Flash cash.
I have said this on the show before, that I was unlucky, I think I was, to have been reading the news at a certain point, and then I forgot the name of a cabinet minister, actually Nicholas Biwott, I can say that. And,
how dare you?
And it was missing from the script, from wherever the script came from, and so we didn't read it, and the gentleman was furious, and we had to repeat the news item 5-6 times during that very day. Kept repeating it every 2 hours because people had to hear that he was there and he gave 10,000 shillings.
And just remember, as you read that item, I'm very sure the amount also reflected hierarchy.
Yes, it did.
So
He
you're
did.
giving 50,000, and then the person who follows will give 40,000.
Yes, it was in that order.
And
wow.
it was
until you get to others.
Yes.
Joe, you've spoken about leaders and whether they should declare their wealth. Leaders in themselves, in their positions they're in, have a sort of an undue advantage in terms of having maybe not access directly to cash, but processes which may end up getting this money because of their position. Where we may have instances like a procurement officer in one of the parastatals who have been investigated in corruption, having 5 houses, a wedding worth millions of shillings, but if you look at what they earn, it does not reflect in that. And it brings me all to the question about the Ndegwa report. Remember when we had the anti-corruption conference earlier this year, the president actually brought up and talked about how civil servants, he talked about the 1971 report that allowed public servants to engage in private business as long as they maintain professional and ethical standards. And he wanted that interrogated, simply because of the fact that their positions as public servants...
as long as that has not happened. But
yes.
I mean...
Joe, just before you move ahead, I wanted to mention about the cash culture. There was something the Deputy President told Hussein right there, saying we shouldn't discuss money in sacks. Money in sacks is a legitimate discussion right now in this country, because even as the anti-corruption teams these days tell you, they're not just checking their accounts, they would wish to know how much cash is also kept in homes, in other places. Because right now, the amount of cash that is not in banks, basically, it's in homes or hidden places.
Or now
is
safety
so
deposit
much.
boxes.
And all you need to do that, or to reflect that, is look at Sundays these days. Big fundraisers days in churches, and after that, some schools get a bit of that. Where is that cash from? If we were to trail backwards and check, was that money withdrawn in the course of the week, you'll find that none of that money was withdrawn. All this was cash that has been availed.
It was withdrawn
it's been taken from under the pillow.
Mattress accounts.
Whose pillow?
We don't know. But
Yeah.
Francis, the president talked about, last year he talked about lifestyle audit, and he actually said, well, it will start with me, go to my deputy and everyone else. The deputy himself is on record as complaining actually that it seems that it was done on him, probably referring to the newspaper articles and all that. But it does seem to have stalled this whole thing of lifestyle audit, and that's something that could probably tell us at every point who owns what, and then we look at their lifestyle and say, well, we know what you earn, we know the job we gave you, unless you're doing anything else that we don't know about, this can't be your lifestyle.
Easier said than done. In fact, if the president was very serious about the lifestyle audit, he would not even have done it on anybody else. He would have started himself, because he did not require any law, any prompting. He just needed to avail himself and avail what he owns. Start there. You know, lead by example, as we keep saying. But you see, this is a political pronouncement. The practicality of it is very difficult, because most of our leaders, they don't actually own what they do rightfully. Let's start there. Because the salary scales for all public offices are public, are open. Salaries and Remuneration Commission
but why would he
made
make
that
a statement
declaration
like that if he's not going to follow through? Because
it's a nice thing to say and a nice thing for people to hear. But if it was really meant, by now we would have made some steps. The reason why it will not happen, because it is a very antagonistic procedure. You want to say track so and so, and this is what they own. It is very easy. I mean, walk around here, you will be told, oh, this building belongs to so and so, this vehicle belongs to so and so. Go to Wilson Airport. You'll be told this choppers belong to so and so. It's possible to know who owns what.
Yeah.
But the practicality of it will be very difficult, because there is no political will per se to do it.
Neither is there a law in place. So we're talking about lifestyle audits. Remember the one about the lie detectors that were also going to come in with that. But then also on the legal side, then there was that regulation by the Central Bank of Kenya regarding the movement of money, 1 million shillings. And so it wasn't necessarily that they would actually stop you from doing that, but they would require an explanation. this is 1 million shillings.
They do that today.
Where is it?
They do that today.
They do that today. But even then, you saw members of National Assembly then complaining about this regulation, which, by the way, does not stop you from moving and withdrawing the 1 million. All it does is ask you to fill in a form.
But also, I mean, if you want to move 5 million, you just move it over 6 days. You move like 900
kilos.
No one asks you any questions.
Absolutely. But then the thing is that all of those transactions are filed with the IFC. That's the finance center here in the country, which would then be, work backwards and would start to take a look at, allow me to reciprocate, how much Francis Gashuri has been moving.
Talking about what people
over the last, so there are all these attempts. However, we just seem to find ourselves
at the same point all over again.
You wanted to cut to the chase.
No, I wanted to cut the chase. Some time back, the Standard newspaper carried a headline that said, if words could move mountains, ... And there was the picture of the president and his deputy. The president seems to be very big on promises and very short on follow-ups. I missed the State of the Nation, but I followed it online. And to me, it felt like it took away the momentum against the fight, in the fight against corruption. It took away the momentum. It basically took away the energy that had been gained. Because we would have gone to the specifics that are coming up around this table, especially around wealth declaration. How does it intend to progress?
Finally, one thing I'd like to say, and Gashuri mentioned, is the fact that what does someone
we need
own?
To take a break shortly.
Unaangalia ile building jo, unasema hii building ile ya jo lakini anatoa wapi? Brings me to the whole question of asset recovery. We keep talking about what people have stolen, ichukuliwe kutoka kwao. During the State of the Nation address, the president talked about it and said, we've investigated about 20 cases and gotten assets worth 1.1 billion shillings. So that is, I think, the trend that needs to be followed. The EACC spoke about the importance of asset recovery. They need to go after these people. Look at what someone earns. As you said, it's publicly. Job group D, this is what they earn. But mtu wa job group D anakuaje na majengo 6 katika mji mmoja.
Absolutely. So we want to take that break, but just talking about promises, remember the president and his deputy promised to take a 20% pay cut? That was at the time when the wage bill was all the rage. We don't know whether that happened. Big on promises, perhaps
maybe they did. You haven't seen their pay slip.
Well, it would be, yes. True that. And that's why we're talking about openness with information, access to information. You're watching News Gang. We want to take a break. When we come back, we still have a lot more to talk about, particularly by election. It turns out that those two candidates in Ugenya and Embakasi South want the real winners. Who are the winners in those two by-elections? We will talk about that when we come back.